I had recently broken up with my long-term boyfriend, so naturally I wanted to go on holiday to clear my head. Unfortunately, none of my friends were free, but rather than postponing my trip for a later date, I decided to head off alone. I wasn't planning anything extravagant, just a short trip out of state with a nearby beach and enough bars to drown my sorrows. The journey took ages. I think I was on the train for about 4 hours, so I was so relieved when I had finally arrived at my destination. After all of that travelling, all I wanted to do was just get to my hotel and rest. But as I stepped onto the platform, I felt a pair of eyes on me. I turned around to see a man staring at me intently from the train. I quickly looked away and started to walk, hoping that he would not follow me. But he did. I could hear his footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I quickened my pace, my heart racing with fear. I could feel his eyes burning into my back, and I knew that he was watching my every move. I tried to shake him off, but he just kept following me. As I turned a corner, I saw a deserted alleyway ahead. I knew I had to get away from him, so I ran down that alley, hoping to find some way out. But as I ran, I could still hear his footsteps, but they were getting louder and closer. He was right behind me, with his eyes fixed onto mine. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. He grabbed my arm and pulled me in closer to him, his eyes filled with an eerie intensity. I kicked him hard in the shin, and he stumbled back in pain. I then took advantage of his momentary weakness and ran as fast as I could. I could still hear him, but I didn't look back. I ran until I reached the hotel, and I didn't stop until I was inside the safety of my room. I had called the police and filed a report, but unfortunately there was nothing they could do. I think they searched the train station's CCTV cameras, but somehow the man had managed to avoid detection. After that experience, I was too afraid to leave my hotel room for days. Every time I thought about going outside, I would feel a shiver run down my spine. But eventually, as the days went by, I did start to feel a bit more confident. I thought that maybe I was just being paranoid and that the man on the train was just a coincidence. So I decided to go for a walk, hoping to clear my head. I mean, I had paid for this trip and I was going to damn well enjoy it. As I walked down the street from my hotel toward the local beach, I noticed a man standing on the corner, staring at me with that same eerie intensity that the man on the train had. I froze, feeling that familiar wave of fear wash over me. I couldn't believe that it was happening again. The man started to walk towards me, so I instinctively started to run. He caught up to me and again grabbed me by the arm, and I felt a surge of panic. I tried to scream, but he covered my mouth with his hand, muffling my cries. He dragged me down an alleyway, and I saw a car parked at the end. He opened the door and pushed me inside. I could feel the tears streaming down my face as the realization of this bleak situation had sunken in. I tried to open the doors, but they were locked from the inside, so I began to pound on the windows. He slowly climbed into the driver's seat, almost as if he'd done this many times before, and we drove off into the night. I could see a gun on the passenger seat, and every now and again he would pick it up and play with it as his sick way of threatening me. I had no idea where we were going or what he was going to do to me. All I knew was that I had to escape, somehow. As we drove, I saw an opportunity to make a run for it. The car had slowed down at a traffic light, so I quickly reached for the gun. He tried to fight me for it, but I had a stronger grip and managed to wriggle out of his hand. I pointed it directly at him and demanded that he unlock the doors at once. He did as he was told, and I heard a click. I threw open the door and ran down the road screaming for help. The driver had already taken off, and as I saw him drive away, I noticed that his license plate was covered with black tape. A nice older lady saw me hysterically screaming on the side of the road and rolled down her window asking what was wrong. I told her what I had just gone through, and she immediately insisted I get in the car so she could drive me to the police station. I then told the police everything that had happened. They launched an investigation, and within a few weeks the man was eventually caught. It turned out that he had stalked several other girls over the past few months, where he would capture them, and then throw them away after he was done with their bodies. Apparently, further CCTV footage showed the same man had been waiting outside my hotel every day, just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. A few years ago, my mum had finally remarried after being single for well over a decade. I was so happy at first when I heard she was dating someone, but when she told me they were getting married after just 1 month, concern wasn't even the word. Unfortunately, my worst fears were confirmed when he was arrested for indecent exposure at his local gym. He had this habit of becoming obsessed with women, which would drive him to do crazy things. Ironically, it's what drew my mum to him in the first place, as apparently he made her feel desirable. Well, after his arrest, my mum cut him out of her life and immediately filed for divorce. But she was very closed off about giving me too many details. I always assumed this was due to the embarrassment, so I never questioned her, but I did worry if she ever followed through with the divorce. Last year, I started having this uneasy feeling whenever I left the house. I didn't know why, but I always felt like someone was watching me. I never thought too much about it until one particular day when I was walking home from school. It started when I noticed a car following me. I tried to shrug it off, but as I walked faster, I was aware that the car seemed to be right behind me. I turned around to get a better look, but the windows were tinted, and I couldn't see who was inside. But I eventually made it home and tried to forget about the whole thing. But the next day, the same thing happened again, and the day after that. Every time I left the house, the car would be there, following me. I was so scared and didn't know what to do. It wasn't until I saw a picture of my stepdad on the news that I realised who it was that must have been following me. The local news said that he had been released early from prison, and there was an uproar as he had only served around 6 months of his 2-year sentence. This news broadcast had suddenly taken me back to that horrifying moment. I remember when I spoke to him after his arrest and told him what I thought about him. He just stared at me with this creepy grin on his face and muttered those 6 words, "I'll see you real soon, sweetie." I tried to tell my mum about the stalking, but she didn't believe me. She thought I was making it up, that I was just trying to get attention. I considered going to the police, but I was worried they would judge me, just like my mum had. Looking back, I realise now what a huge mistake that really was. So, after a few more days of walking to and from school as usual, I started to notice that the car wasn't there anymore. As this continued, my fears began to fade, and I truly started to think I was just being paranoid before. I mean, there's lots of cars with tinted windows, and what if that guy in the car was just coincidentally travelling at the same time as me? But these thoughts were suddenly quashed when I was walking home from school, and that same suspicious car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and I could see my stepdad's face with a crazed look in his eyes, and I knew he was up to no good. I ran as fast as I could, but he chased after me in the car and blocked me up against a wall. He got out the car and sprinted towards me. I still remember that look in his eye as he got closer and closer, and that feeling of helplessness that had washed over me. But then, just as all hope was lost, I saw the familiar lights of a police car up ahead. I screamed, but they didn't see me. Luckily though, this was enough to distract my stepdad for a second, and I used this opportunity to escape. I ran straight to my school as I was too scared to head home, as he knew where I lived. I told the school principal and she called the police for me. Apparently my stepdad had a tag on him, so the police were able to track him immediately. They arrested him on the spot, but of course he tried to convince the police I was lying. Well, thank God they believed me, and after hours of interviewing him, he eventually broke down and confessed. He was sent back to prison the next day, but unfortunately, the story doesn't quite end there, as a few days later I received a strange package in the mail. It was a letter from my stepdad, confessing to everything he had done and apologising for his actions, but the letter also contained a key and an address. I threw the package away and told my mum. Turns out she'd been speaking with my stepdad every day when he was in prison, and promised she'd wait for him. She apologised as she blamed herself for his persistent obsession with our family. I did forgive her, but made her call the divorce lawyer at once, which she did. I've now seen the papers, so I know it's legit. Plus, the lawyer managed to get a restraining order through as well, which gave us a bit more peace of mind. But I dread the day he eventually gets out again, because I'm pretty sure I know exactly where he will go. I had been a TikToker for a few months at this point, and I'd seen some really fast growth from my trending videos. I was always on the lookout for new and exciting video ideas, and eventually I stumbled upon this trend where I would walk through a store with my phone in my back pocket, recording people who looked at my backside. At first, it was just harmless fun. I would put my phone in my back pocket and film the reactions of men as I walked past them. It was all good until one of my fans commented that they noticed the same man in all of the different stores where I recorded. He was always in the background, never looking away from me. His eyes were intense, and he would follow me around the store, always at a safe distance. Well, my videos had really blown up, and the views I was getting made me completely disregard the possible dangers. In fact, the controversy actually gave my videos more attention, which in turn grew my following even more. I continued with my videos, but I started going to different stores in the hopes he wouldn't be there. But as the days went by, his presence became impossible to ignore. It was as if he was watching my every move, and I began to feel uneasy and nervous, always checking my surroundings to see if he was there. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was being watched every minute of the day. I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was around me, waiting for the right moment. Well, a few more days went by, and I didn't see him again. I assumed that maybe he had seen the TikTok videos and had given up, but then I received a video from one of my fans. It was a warning that the man who had been stalking me was outside my house. They had linked a TikTok account that had several videos of me. The account only had about 20 followers, and they all looked like bots, but for every video thumbnail I saw on the account, I recognised the location. My heart raced as I saw the most recent upload, which was a short 5-second video of my house, followed by a sinister laugh at the end just before the video cut out. I peeked through the window and saw a figure standing in the shadows. I knew it was him. I could feel my breaths getting shorter and my heart pounding even harder. I called the police, and they arrived within minutes. Luckily, he hadn't tried anything and was still just waiting for his moment, I guess, because the police managed to find the man, hiding behind some bushes in my backyard, watching me through the window. I was terrified when I found out. He had clearly been getting closer to breaking in. The police arrested him, and I later found out that he had been stalking me for weeks. He had been following me everywhere, not just the stores. I deleted my account after this experience. I was too petrified to continue creating the same content, and I was fearful that someone else might take his place. I mean, let's be honest, you never really know who's watching you on the internet. It was a typical Monday evening in London. I had just finished work and was on my way home, taking the Underground as usual. The train was crowded, but I managed to find a seat next to the window. I settled in and took out my phone to check my messages, trying to ignore the noise around me, when suddenly a man sat down next to me. He was tall and had a scruffy beard. He looked at me and smiled, and I could feel my skin crawl. He started talking to me, asking me about my day, but I didn't want to engage in conversation. I gave him short answers and looked out the window, hoping he would get the hint, but he didn't. He kept talking to me, telling me about his life, and I could feel him getting closer and closer to me. I tried to move away, but the train was too crowded. Finally, my stop arrived, and I got up quickly, trying to push past him. But he grabbed my arm and pulled me back, his grip tight and painful. "Don't go yet," he said. "Let's talk some more." I was terrified. I struggled to get free, but he wouldn't let me go. And then, suddenly, the train's lights went out. The entire carriage was plunged into darkness, and I could hear screams and cries of panic from other passengers. But the man next to me didn't seem to be affected. He kept holding me, his grip getting tighter, and then, in the darkness, I felt something sharp against my neck. I screamed and struggled, but he just wouldn't let go. But then, just when I thought it was all over, the lights flickered back on, and the train was brought to a halt. The man let me go, and I stumbled out of the carriage, gasping for air. As I walked home, shaken and scared, I couldn't get rid of that feeling that he was still following me. I looked around every corner, trying to see if he was there, but I couldn't find him. It wasn't until I got home that I finally realised what had happened. This man had put a knife to my throat on that train, but I'd somehow managed to escape his clutches. I felt lucky, but even now, years later, I still have nightmares about that night. And every time I take the underground, I can't help but wonder if he's still out there, watching and waiting for his next victim. As I left the swimming pool, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The class had been tough, and I was looking forward to going home and getting some much-needed rest. But as I started walking down the street, I noticed a man on the other side of the road. He was walking maybe a few steps behind me, keeping his distance, but I could feel his eyes were on me. I turned around and realised that he'd crossed the road, and he quickly looked away, pretending to be interested on his phone. I tried to ignore him and kept walking, but I could feel his presence behind me. I quickened my pace, hoping to lose him, but he matched my steps. I knew I was in trouble, so I looked around, hoping to see someone I knew, or maybe a police officer, but the street was deserted. The man started to walk faster, and I knew he was getting closer, and I could hear him muttering to himself. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, and I stumbled. He caught up with me, and I felt his hand on my shoulder. I turned around again, and this was when I saw his face for the first time. His eyes were dark, and his face was twisted in a sinister grin. He whispered in my ear, telling me that he had been watching me, and then pushed me against the wall and started to grope me. I felt sick to my stomach, and tears were streaming down my face. But then I remembered the self-defense move that my dad had taught me. I kicked this man hard in the groin, and he stumbled back in pain. I took advantage of this moment and ran as fast as I could. I could hear him chasing me, but there was no chance I was looking back. I just ran until I reached a busy street, and I saw a police car parked nearby. I ran towards it, screaming for help. The man was eventually caught, but I will forever be aware of just how lucky I was to have escaped that day. I could have never imagined that I would be the victim of stalking. I mean, I was just a regular teenage boy who occasionally posted pictures of his daily life on Instagram. But one day, I started getting messages from a stranger. Someone who I didn't know at all. At first, I thought it was just a prank or maybe a spam message. But then the messages started becoming more frequent and more disturbing. They would always start with, "Hey handsome," or "How are you today, cutie?" and then would ask me personal questions like where I lived or what school I went to. I tried to ignore the messages, but they just kept coming. Every time I would check my phone, there would be another message waiting for me from this stalker. And then, the worst thing in the world happened. This person had started showing up at places where I hung out with my friends. I would see them watching me from a distance. I would tell my friends, but they would just laugh and tell me I'm being dramatic. Well, I quickly became too scared to go out in public, afraid that the stalker would be there, waiting for me. I couldn't even sleep at night, constantly checking my phone for any new messages or notifications. I did eventually decide to block the stalker on Instagram, and even reported them to the authorities. But even after I did all of that, I still felt like I was being watched. It was like the stalker was always one step ahead of me, always finding a way to get to me somehow. I don't know how this story will end, but I know I can never let my guard down. I'll always be looking over my shoulder, always checking my phone, forever wondering if that stalker is still out there. It's a scary feeling, one that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Thank you for watching, and if you prefer the longer format videos, please let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to subscribe for more scary stories.